In the heart of rural America lies a small town named Ravenwood. Tucked away in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, Ravenwood was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone else's business. It had a quiet charm, but with its isolation came strange rumors, tales of forgotten places, eerie happenings, and one particular road that no one dared to travel after dark. The road was known as Harrow's Hollow, a long, desolate stretch that ran between the dense woods and the edge of town. It was the kind of road that people avoided even during the day, but it was at night when it truly became something of a nightmare. Local legends told of a woman in white, a ghostly figure who haunted the road after sundown. Her presence was said to bring an eerie chill, and those who saw her claimed to hear strange whispers, feel cold fingers of dread creeping up their spines, and see glowing red eyes that seemed to pierce their very souls. But the legend of the Phantom Woman was not one that everyone in Ravenwood feared. For John, the town's bus driver, the rumors never bothered him. He had worked the late shift for years, driving along Harrow's Hollow on his usual route. He had seen strange things during his years behind the wheel, but he never let it get to him. After all, people would talk, and he didn't believe in ghosts. That is, until one fateful night when everything changed. It was a cold autumn evening when John had his first encounter with the Phantom Woman. He had just finished his last stop in town and was making his way back through the hollow, the streets empty and quiet. The bus headlights illuminated the road ahead, but the shadows in the woods seemed to grow darker as the fog rolled in. As he passed an old, decaying post near the edge of the road, something caught his eye. A figure stood by the post. She was dressed in a long white gown, her dark hair flowing behind her, almost as if the wind itself were moving her. At first, John thought it was just another late-night traveler in need of a ride. He slowed the bus down, pulled over, and opened the door. "Need a ride?" John called out, his voice cutting through the stillness of the night. The woman didn't respond. She simply turned her head slowly, her pale face barely visible under her hair. John felt a shiver run down his spine but shrugged it off. It was just a woman waiting for a ride, he told himself. The woman climbed aboard the bus without saying a word. She sat in the back, staring out of the window into the dark woods. John couldn't help but feel uneasy. It wasn't the woman's appearance that unsettled him. It was the quiet, unnatural way she seemed to move. It was almost as if she wasn't really there, as though she were made of mist and shadow. As John drove down the dark, deserted road, he stole a glance in the rearview mirror. The woman's eyes were glowing red. His heart skipped a beat. He quickly looked away, dismissing it as his imagination. But when he glanced again, he saw that her eyes were still glowing, now brighter, more intense. His pulse quickened. He tried to focus on the road, but every so often, he could see her in the corner of his eye, inching closer, her hollow gaze fixed on him. John's grip tightened on the steering wheel, and his thoughts raced. He needed to shake this off. Maybe he was just tired. He hadn't been sleeping well lately, and the shadows in the woods were playing tricks on him. But then, without warning, the bus lurched to a sudden stop. John cursed under his breath and tried to restart the engine, but it wouldn't budge. The bus was dead in the middle of the road, the headlights flickering erratically. John's heart raced as he glanced at the woman. She was no longer sitting at the back. Instead, she was right next to him. Her face was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes glowed a deep crimson. The air in the bus turned frigid. "You've crossed the line, driver," she whispered. Her voice was soft, like the wind rustling through the trees. "This road has claimed many lives. If you fear me, you will become one of them." John's breath caught in his throat. This was real. The legends were true. His heart pounded in his chest and his hands trembled as he tried once again to start the bus, but it refused to move. The woman leaned in closer, her face inches from his. "You cannot run," she murmured. "You cannot escape." Just then, the lights flickered out completely, and the bus was plunged into complete darkness. John's breath came in short, frantic gasps. The temperature inside the bus dropped drastically, and he could see his breath condensing in front of him. Then, in the dark, the woman disappeared. John didn't know what to do. He fumbled for the door handle and stumbled out of the bus, his heart racing. As soon as he stepped off the bus, the lights came back on, but the woman was gone. The road was eerily quiet, the only sound the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed him, watching his every move. But he didn't care anymore. He just wanted to get home. When he reached the village, he knew he would never drive that road again after dark. His encounter with the Phantom Woman had changed him forever. He kept his story to himself at first, but as time passed, he couldn't keep the truth hidden any longer. The other villagers began to notice that John never drove the hollow route anymore, and when they asked why, he finally shared his terrifying experience. As the tale of John's encounter spread, more and more people began to talk about the woman in white. But there was one man who wasn't afraid. His name was Michael, and he had recently moved to Ravenwood. He had heard the stories, but he was skeptical. He didn't believe in ghosts, and he certainly didn't think some woman in a white dress could scare him. One night, Michael made a bet with his friends that he would walk down Harrow's Hollow alone and confront the Phantom Woman. His friends tried to talk him out of it, but Michael was determined. Around midnight, Michael rode his bike to the road. The air was thick with fog, and the silence was almost deafening. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, but he told himself it was just nerves. As he passed the old post near where John had seen the woman, he saw her again. She stood at the edge of the road, just like in the stories. Her long white gown shimmered faintly in the moonlight, and her dark hair framed her face like a veil. Her eyes glowed a haunting red. Michael felt a chill run through his body, but he refused to back down. He approached her boldly. "Are you really a ghost?" he shouted. "Come on, scare me!" The woman didn't respond, but slowly she began to walk toward him. Her eyes burned with an unholy light, and Michael felt a coldness wash over him. He backed away, but his bike's wheels got stuck in the mud. Suddenly, he felt a force gripping his chest, pulling him toward the woman. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. His vision blurred, and the air grew thick with the smell of decay. His friends who had been hiding nearby rushed to help, but when they arrived, Michael had vanished. The only trace left of him was his bike, still wedged in the mud, standing like a monument to his disappearance. The town was shaken by the news of Michael's disappearance. The villagers were once again terrified. No one knew what had happened to him, but one thing was certain: the Phantom Woman was real, and she was not to be trifled with. As the months passed, the town of Ravenwood grew more and more afraid. The older generations whispered about the curse of Harrow's Hollow, and the younger ones began to avoid the road entirely. But one young man, Jake, was determined to find out the truth. Jake was Michael's best friend, and he couldn't accept that his friend had simply disappeared. He refused to believe that Michael had been taken by some phantom, so he decided to face the woman himself. One dark evening, Jake set out on foot to Harrow's Hollow. He knew the road well and was prepared for whatever he might encounter. He walked for what seemed like hours, the shadows growing longer and the cold creeping in. As he neared the post, he saw her. The Phantom Woman was waiting for him, just like she had waited for John and Michael before him. Her red eyes gleamed in the dark, and she spoke in a low, chilling voice. "You cannot save him," she said. "He is already mine." Jake didn't flinch. "I'm not afraid of you," he said, his voice steady. "Where is Michael? What have you done with him?" The woman smiled, a twisted, haunting smile that sent a wave of dread through Jake's chest. But he stood his ground. "You cannot defeat me by fearing me," she said. "Only by facing your fear can you escape." Jake, drawing on every ounce of courage, looked directly into her eyes. "I'm not afraid," he repeated. "I'm taking Michael back." The woman seemed to hesitate for a moment. Then, in a swift motion, she raised her hand and the ground around them began to tremble. Dark shadows swirled in the air, and Jake felt as though the very earth beneath his feet was trying to consume him. But Jake refused to back down. In that moment, he felt something shift inside him. He knew that he wasn't alone. Michael's spirit was still out there, and if they stood together, they could defeat the fear that had held them captive for so long. With a final defiant shout, Jake ran toward the woman, reaching into the darkness to pull Michael back. The shadows tried to swallow him whole, but Jake's will was stronger. He grabbed Michael's hand, and together they broke free from the grip of the woman. As they ran toward the village, the phantom woman's voice echoed in the night. But Jake and Michael didn't look back. They knew they had defeated the fear that had plagued their town for so long. The next morning, the village was abuzz with the news of Jake and Michael's return. The two friends shared their story, and the town began to realize that the phantom woman was not a creature to be feared, but a force to be reckoned with. Her power came from fear itself, and once they faced it, they were free. From that day forward, Ravenwood was never the same. The people no longer feared Harrow's Hollow. They walked the road together, united in their courage. Every year they held a festival in honor of the Phantom Woman, not as a ghost but as a symbol of strength and unity. And every year they reminded themselves that fear, when faced head-on, would always lose its power. In the end, Ravenwood became known as the town that had conquered fear. And its people had learned that true strength lay in courage, unity, and the willingness to face the unknown. And as for the Phantom Woman, some say she still walks the road, but now, instead of terror, she is a reminder of the courage that lies within all of us.